to see you again.
Thank you very much, Harold. It's great to be here.
And sorry it's under such dire circumstances. What's going on in Lebanon is hard to fathom, and we'll be getting some background from you. And
It's just horrific. It really is. It's really a horrific situation.
Farouk must be turning over in his resting space, you know. But,
he must be. He must be. And Yasser Arafat and all
the rest.
All the rest.
Anyway, welcome very much to our conversation. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Sharin Chiorazzo, and she was the fiance of the eminently famous, I would say, in his realm, Farouk, who had the program on WBAI about Palestine, who unfortunately, after having been in prison, got out and then had a heart attack and died recently. I'm sorry about that. But she's carrying on the work because she is a Middle East analyst, and she's also the host of a program, the WBAI radio program called Live from Palestine. She keeps an eye on that part of the world. And Sharin, welcome very, very much to conversation.
Thank you very much, Harold. I just wanted to say that his 2-year anniversary passed last Friday,
Farouk,
and we had a vigil for him, which was pretty well attended, and you know, it was covered by some of the papers that had been, you know, constantly covering his story, and we went out to the cemetery afterwards, and you know, it was rather uplifting. But as you said, in the face of all of this war crimes and aggression, Israeli aggression against the Lebanese people now, expanding their aggression from the Palestinians now to the Lebanese people, I think that it underscores the fact that Farouk's work is really still so much needs to be done.
Right, there's a great deal to be done.
And that we need to keep taking this up and keep correcting the wrong portrayal, the wrong U.S. media portrayal of the situation that's constantly on the side of Israel.
Yes, university, everybody in the, every single person in the Senate voted to keep, to not call for a ceasefire and to allow the Israelis to bombard the bejesus out of Lebanon, which is going on as you and I talk now, much to the chagrin of most all of the world, except perhaps the United States and the Israelis.
Yeah, and even to the chagrin of the progressive community in the United States. I mean, the activists and the Jewish anti-Zionists and the progressives, not to say the Palestinian Americans who live here and the Lebanese Americans and everybody else. I think it's a real moral concern for the world that the U.S. and the powers that be refuse to call an immediate ceasefire and to condemn Israel for the genocide and the war crimes it's committing against the Lebanese people on the pretext of going after Hezbollah.
Yeah, well, that's the pretext that they have, and they say that they have the soldiers were taken in that. But there's a context, of course, out of which that's all coming, a long period of Israeli presence there and the opposition to them, and the Hezbollah is a new force, and it's very, very disquieting, and it's terrible what's going on. And,
and I mean, let's not forget.
They say they want to give the overwhelming, we should understand the Israeli military force is perhaps the 4th largest military force in the world. They have absolutely unlimited support, virtually unlimited support from the United States of America. It's at least $3 billion, I think, a year.
More like 6. It's more up to about 6 now, and that's only the official money. That doesn't include the loan guarantees and the money that's
so in a very real sense, Americans should be cognizant of this, because Israel is an extension of and would not have been able to be existing in this order, doing what it's doing now, without the American political support that is given to that country, and we really have reason to question that, and they assume the legitimacy on the side of the United States and Israel, and the fate of those two political entities, maybe on a world scale, are tied up one with the other, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think that we can't negate the fact that the U.S. media is completely complicit in this and only spinning one side of it, and in, you know, spinning the Israelis always as the heroes, as the moral agents, as anything that's done being on the side of morality. We can just take John Bolton's statement the other day that the UN ambassador that there is no moral equivalent between civilian Lebanese deaths that are killed at the hands of the Israelis and Israeli civilian deaths.
Because they take it that they represent, in a certain sense, the powers that be. I suppose in Rome the emperors assumed a legitimacy to their work in Judea when they were there and so forth. They assumed they're legitimate in a historical sense, Then you had the kings of the feudal period in Europe thought that they were legitimate.
Correct.
And then you had that. And now the United States, that's the thing, it's a larger issue. Program I taped earlier today with Lenny Brenner, I was trying to get across and I couldn't and everything. But the thing is that they assume that the United States of America, which is now a superpower, the Soviet Union has imploded. The Chinese system, which had been a socialist, communist-oriented thing, has transmogrified into an openly capitalist system, gang-running things. 80,000 demonstrations a year by people. The people, that their system in place has legitimacy, when in fact it's not. The system in place is not legitimate in a historical sense. There's some new change needed because that system does not serve the interests of the mass of the people. And one wonders if the assumed legitimacy that they claim is ever going to be questioned by some sort of a stirring or an uprising or a revolutionary movement or a development within the zeitgeist by the people of the world, and if the situation in the case of Israel attacking Lebanon and that sort of thing might be the spark of something that will set off a movement among the people of the world of revulsion against the inadequacy of the system that claims legitimacy and lead to maybe real revolutionary change on a large scale beyond even the Middle East, if you can follow all of that or not.
I mean, we hope so. We hope that it would spark some sort of a change. But I think, as you said, that as long as the United States assumes the role of moral perpetrator and, you know, the one on the side of right with Israel in the face of all of this opposition, because, as you said, you know, we have differing opinions and differing viewpoints all throughout Europe, all throughout the East. Unequivocally, this aggression, this Israeli aggression against the Lebanese people is being condemned throughout the Arab world, needless to say. And even throughout parts of Europe and even amongst the American progressive population. But we have a real problem with the media because as much as the media keeps spinning that there's some moral imperative to this, somehow it permeates the psyches of even those progressives. And they start to think, well, gee, Israel must be doing something right because, you know, in other words, they wouldn't be able to get away with it. And, you know, Hezbollah must be, you know, the fact that they're lobbing rockets into Israel on the defensive, we must say, somehow permeates the minds of even the progressives and in other words, you know, calls into question whether or not the United States by might is somehow and Israel is somehow legitimate.
Yeah, right. Well, the right makes right. I mean, might makes right is assumed, and that's like a social Darwinistic thing. If you have the power, you can control the other people do things, and whether or not you have a system that is right, and then you claim that you're right. I saw Mr. Richardson, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier in the program or not, but he was on today, and he said the world community is with us, and the world community is not with us on this.
Is not.
And it is good that the world community not be with us, and that they question the legitimacy of the American model that they're trying to put on the world, I would say.
Yes.
And it may be the Israeli thing was a godsend in a way because it's going to set up a group that if the ire of the Arab and the Islamic world ever comes to focus on that insufficiently to bring real pressure on Israel.
Well, we hope so.
Real pressure.
Real pressure.
Or they can't strut around and just kill everything in the wake and say they're going to, if they put real pressure on, that would have ramifications back to this country. Well, because we're so intimately tied up with it. And the power, they could question Rome on the Potomac. The world.
Well, we hope so.
Because we do not have a vision adequate to what the world needs.
I mean, I think what needs to happen is the world really does have to isolate the United States and Israel and really start to question the legitimacy of the fact that the United States is taking real advantage of its superpower status to the point where they decide, even though the United States has not signed on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, even though Israel hasn't, to the point where the United States decides who responsibility possibly can have nuclear weapons. I mean, it just came out today that the United States decided that India can have nuclear weapons and that there'll be no problem with this. But that when a country like Iran starts to develop even nuclear power, the United States is the moral agent in deciding, you know, and that there's no comment on the fact that Israel has had nuclear weapons for the longest time, and that's the only thing that basically allows it, besides United States support to be a power in the region and to bully everybody else.
Yeah, well, that does because, and also they've got. They've got, I don't know exactly what's going on with that Zionism and so forth, but there are lunatic fringe areas there, and I just chatted with you, that they are really, they have a narrative that they're really tied into solidly, and they think that that right is on their side, that kind of thing. And there
God
are
is
people,
on their side. That's what they think.
God mit uns, the Germans said on their belt buckles in the First World War, but that they have a mission, and some of those people really do have this idea of being able to destroy the wogs and bring complete. They're like colonial people in that part of the world. Colonial powers like the British Raj in India or something, they can bring that force down, that they're bringing progress, and that they're going to have what they call a greater Israel, that they can control that whole area, the resources, out to the Euphrates.
Well, sure, and that's been a vision for a very long time.
There are elements there that really have that idea that we can destroy that. So you destroy Lebanon, then maybe you can destroy Syria, and you get all of those Arab people to be absolutely like in a slave status to the power of Israel. They will override, and they will put complete control over that. Do you think they're an expansionist kind of mentality that motivates that system that some people call fascistic?
Well, I think we have to go back to the origins of the state, and we have to go back to the fact that the Zionist vision was fueled on this expansionist viewpoint, and that even though the Zionists, who were in the minority at the time, by the way, considered themselves secular, they took a very biblical vision of this whole thing, that, you know, this land is our land. God promised it to us. He promised us everything from the Nile to the Euphrates. And the proof is
Was that part of it? Nile to the Euphrates?
From the Nile to the Euphrates. If you go, if you go to the wall of the Knesset right now, engraved on the outside of the Knesset is the saying, Min el Nil ila el Efrat, which says, from the Nile to the Euphrates.
That's where?
From the Nile. It's on the outside wall of the Knesset.
Of the outside wall of the Knesset?
It's engraved on the wall of the Knesset, from the Nile to the Euphrates.
Is that right?
That's right. That's correct.
Is that on the net somewhere available in translated form and so forth?
I'm sure.
And what would the people in Israel say when they look at that? Would they say, yeah?
I would think
Or would they say, Deutschland über alles? Or what?
Well, if we take
would they take that? Because that goes all the way into Iraq, which we've destroyed.
Correct.
And a lot of people think it was the neocon coalition that brought us and led us into that in order to destroy that country. We could destroy others. You know, we bombed the reactor in Iraq. Remember, what the Israelis did. So I mean, that's a serious thing. So they're expansionists.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying
Do the Arab
now,
peoples feel that way? They're expansionists in terms of their intent in that part of the world. They want to control and dominate that whole part of the world. And you got to beat the wogs into submission, as colonial powers tend to do with their military overriding power.
Well, the Arab countries feel that Israel is expansionist in its vision.
That's what I meant.
In fact, they have adopted. There's a saying when Palestinians and Notori Carter people get out there and protest. There's a saying. They say, "From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free." But they've really adopted that from the river to the sea, from the expansionist vision of the Israeli state. That the Israeli state started out with just what they considered, you know, with all of historic Palestine, which they considered what they were supposed to be given by God, but that was just the beginning. And that, so when they take Syrian land, and when they take Lebanese land, and when they took all the parts of the Sinai, that was their God-given right to do so. And it's not a minority vision. I mean, I would say that at least...
among Israelis?
Among Israelis, it's not really... I mean,
there are peace people there and stuff.
Oh, of course there are.
Yeah, anywhere,
But if you look at the secular viewpoint, the secular Zionist viewpoint, it was expansionist from the get-go.
Even the secular,
But let's take a step further to the religious parties. I mean, Shas and the Third Way, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but the majority of the religious parties, except the ultra-Orthodox, who don't believe that a state of Israel should exist at all. Like those Satmars, Notori Carta, and you have the ultra-Orthodox in Israel.
That's based upon a quaint little notion about how that was all according to the Torah. As I understand from the Torah, that ingathering of the Jews who had been expelled for their sins
Yes.
was not to occur except within a world of universal justice existing, which does not have, and it would be done totally peacefully with no military whatsoever, and it would be accompanied by the Moshiach.
Exactly. It
And the
cannot happen until
Moshiach would do it,
comes.
and to do it before the Mashiach appears. And I notice there is no Mashiach. Where is the Mashiach?
Right.
And there is none, and that it's a sacrilege and a heresy on the part of the secularly oriented Jews to do that ahead of time, and the hardcore Jews are just doing everything the Torah true Jews are doing everything they can to disassociate themselves from this heresy, this sacrilegious establishment of the state of Israel in this time before its time.
Yes, yes, and there are also those who would claim that, like those like Lenny Brenner and others that would claim that, Zionism really is an affront to Judaism. I mean, it's really antithetical to Judaism because the basic values and tenets of Judaism are justice and peace and brotherly
Prophetic
love.
Judaism has been thrown to the four winds.
Has been thrown to the wolves. Also in this exclusivity of having the idea of having a purely Jewish state really poses a major dilemma in the post-20th century world of nation states, because nation states in the post-20th century era are supposed to be secular and they're supposed to be pluralistic. They're not supposed to be isolated to...
It's like apartheid.
As in the 19th century, this vision of a pure race. It started with the Germans and then it was picked up by the Zionists. And, even Islamic states, are considered today not to be a really good idea.
Yeah, right.
And if you interview...
That's why I love New York. Everybody's here. Everybody, I like that. Everybody, right.
And just the fact that you would have a purely Jewish state where your citizenship in that state is based upon your membership in a certain religion poses a real dilemma. And I mean, let's go back to the idea of, say, Hamas and those people that, many would think, well, they reject, they don't see that Israel has the right to exist. I want to clarify that because it's such an important point.
Right.
That Hamas and even Hezbollah have never said that Israel, quote unquote, has no right to exist. They've said that Israel has no right to exist, number one, on the backs of the Palestinian people.
Which is a necessary corollary?
Well, which in the Zionist vision was necessary, but they're saying that was not necessary.
No, but I mean, is a necessary corollary that they have no right to exist on the backs, that is at the disadvantage of the stuff. That was part of what the Torah said.
Exactly.
In terms of what we done. With no disadvantage to the people who were there, and here they just trampled on those.
And that it has no right to exist as a purely Jewish state when there's there are three peoples in the area of three different religions and many different ethnicities that have a right to be included in that state.
But that would follow then, if that were the case, to say that they have no right to exist, since they have ignored the Torah and they have they've written on, they've taken over olive trees and they've done all the things like that. It would be tantamount to them saying they have no right to exist the way they are.
The way they are today.
In any way, and that they see no reason to change, and particularly they got this expansionist view and this kind of thing. It makes sense for them to say Israel does not have the right to exist, and you got these things coming out of Iran now.
Well, as a Jewish state, though, as a Jewish state, because what they would say is that, first of all, Israel would have a right to exist within defined boundaries or defined borders if we came upon a two-state solution where the Palestinians, where there was a comprehensive solution to the Palestinian problem, and where the Palestinian state were able to exist, then Israel might have a right to exist within defined boundaries.
Lenny was here before. Lenny Brennan, he was saying that they should come up with a thing like the African National Congress in South Africa, and that you would set up a secular state, and but it wouldn't be Jews; it would be for everybody, and that would be the end of the idea of Zionism.
Well, that's
and the Jews have a very deep sense of persecution by pogrom, and they had suffered the Holocaust. So there's a deep-seated sense in many Jewish people that there's something in the in the world, population of the world, that is irretrievably and forever anti-Semitic against Jews, and they have to become strong in order to fight that off. And so it would be very difficult for them to be in anything other than a Jewish state where they think they're going to have the security finally from the built-in anti-Semitism of the rest of the human family.
But you know what?
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And among a lot of people.
But I don't think that that washes, and I think that they have to get over that complex. And I know it's easy for me to say, not
you didn't go
having
through a
grown up.
Holocaust.
And I can certainly sympathize, and I can certainly, you know, my empathy goes out to any people that goes through a Holocaust.
Yeah.
Okay. But however, this complex of that we have a right to have this purely Jewish state because of the fact that we suffered a genocide, you know, this complex has to be gotten over, because right now anti-Semitism actually exists way more in European countries than it does in the Arab world. And if it exists, it's not anti-Semitism, because let's clarify, Arabs themselves are Semites.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Well, yeah,
but anti-Jewish hatred, if it exists, it doesn't. It exists now because of what Israel has done.
It's anti-Zionism.
It's anti-Zionism, and it exists because of what Israel has done to the Palestinian people and the continuing aggression against them.
Yeah.
And you know, these other vision, because I think before we go on and on, we have to really clarify this. There's two visions of the Israeli, of the solving of this conflict, which would be either a two-state solution, which would have Palestine as an independent, viable state, with, of course, East Jerusalem as its capital, within defined borders, with having an army.
Not Bantustans.
Not Bantustans, contiguous territories, not always being under the threat of Israel, which is going to be very, very difficult to achieve. Or there's the one-state solution, which many Palestinian groups have adhered to, and even some minority in the Israeli state as well, where you have one democratic state for all the people that live there.
But there goes your Jewish state.
Yeah,
which is the raison d'etre.
No,
so that's the end of Zionism.
The Jewish state has to be dismantled as a purely Jewish state. You cannot anymore
under
have
that formula.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what complexes people have. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they say, yeah, but we're paranoid that a Holocaust could happen again. Having a purely Jewish state does not negate the possibility. In fact, it
might
probably
lead to
enhances
it. Yeah, right.
It probably enhances it.
It seems to be,
Yeah.
seems to be. Because the whole world is focused. You get votes of Israel and the United States only in the United Nations, everybody else voting against it, and they're building a very wide coterie of very, very angry people around the world, don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, and it's growing now,
and
the thing with Lebanon now is just growing, and it's based upon a long track record.
But see, one of the problems that we really have is that Israel has based a lot of its policies towards the Arab states and its internal policies towards this paranoia about, you know, never again, and about having to protect themselves and this and that, in the terms that they, in other words, will see that and this is part of what the entire regional conflict is about right now. Anytime they see any country in the region becoming a regional power and starting to develop a nuclear technology or whatever, they have to squash it. Because they have to be the undisputed power in the area. And that goes back to the paranoia that they feel that, well, you know, everybody in the Arab world hates us and they're going to annihilate us. They want to see us dumped into the sea. This has to be gotten over, and fairness and justice has to take over.
And if I meant, we started saying that they are, in a certain sense, our pit bull.
Yes,
in a certain sense, Israel is a pit bull that was birthed by United States and allowed to happen and grown, and they are those Apache helicopters that rain fire down on people and all that. So that's all being done by money out of our taxpayers that are going, because they've been very successful at winning the hearts and minds of the American people and the Congress, particularly most powerful lobby, I think, probably in the Congress or against the Congress is the AIPAC lobby. There are people who are not questioning that. Why is it that we should be so tied to that? And that's something that's coming up that's likely to be. So if you have a challenge of Israel, and the United States has military forces in 130 countries of the world and are going on a pattern to exert total spectrum dominance of the whole planet and space. So it would seem that the United States, and they have a vision and a way of organizing things that is skewed to a few people who run have the power, and the masses of the people are not being served. Middle class is being undercut. Their model is not worthy of respect on the part of the world in terms of the needs of the people of the world. They don't have a vision worthy of being followed, but it's being put upon the world. And maybe there's going to be, coming out of all this, a challenge not only to Israel and their hubris, but a challenge even more than that to the United States of America, that they are assuming we are legitimate historically, and it might be that there's something new that's going to have to be coming out.
Sure.
The way that the American Revolution helped undercut the feudal order in Europe that had held for 800 years, an Ancient regime. Do you understand?
Yeah, sure.
Do you think it's a possibility?
Well, I think it's more than a possibility because I think the legitimacy of the United States and its policies, especially its, you know, its very aggressive policies and all the money that's being spent on these foreign oil wars and occupations.
Absolutely.
You know, think about it. I mean, if we took the $100 billion+ or more that's being spent, you know, on the illegal occupation of Iraq.
More than that.
More than that. $100+ billion a month or something like that. I don't know exactly what the statistics are. But that, and then if you take the billions that we give to Israel, yet 2 days ago another shipment of arms was sent to Israel unconditionally. Now if the United States really
They will give them whatever they can do.
Yeah, and if the United States really wanted to be an honest broker in this and a neutral party and, you know, contribute to peace, would they have sent Israel all these armaments to attack a another sovereign country?
Yeah, we're taping now today, and there's supposed to be a program with Norton Mesvinsky, who's supposed to air tomorrow. It's not, because they're going to have a special program. It's outdated because we're talking on Thursday, tomorrow, Friday, and our time slot. They're going to have a program done by Mosaic, special program about the Middle East. I think we all are going to be. But the point being is, Norton Mesvinsky was a close associate of Israel Shahak. I don't know if you're familiar with Israel Shahak.
Yes.
Brilliant man. Yes. He's a very good friend of Noam Chomsky and so forth. And he had questioned the thing about how over the long millennia of the diaspora from there, that by and large the Jewish people had not had a long period of suffering and that sort of thing, anti-Semitism, but that they were very well trained, very intellectually competent, and that they had made alliances very often with the local landlord or the people who were controlling the people. And then if there was an uprising or something of that sort, they had been collecting taxes, doing bailiff's duty, had gotten close, had led an upper middle class life in that kind of context, and the people directed their fury at those because they had served the Lord. Now in the case, if ever the world gets itself really well inclined toward the United States, Israel has been a pit bull to the United States of America. And if America is challenged by the world, then perhaps there will be a great deal of bad feeling directed at the Zionists, who were the pit bull, loyal subject to this person whose legitimacy is being questioned, if you can understand. Now, it's hard to see because they're so overwhelmingly powered. They're in their catbird seat, but that can change, and that would be a direction of why a great deal of animus would be directed at them for having cozied up to such an inappropriate organization of the local or world situation.
I mean, Lenny Brenner actually made a good point the other day. I heard him speaking.
On Playmel.
Yeah, and Playtel. And he Playtel Benjamin. He basically said that Zionism as a mind frame for the Jewish people is really on its way out. It's declining in popularity amongst the youth, the Jewish youth, because they just can't see the sense in it anymore. There's so much information available today. Zionism as an ideology and this blind support of Israel in the face of all its aggression. They just don't identify with the state of Israel the way their parents did, and they think that this religious stuff about, you know, this being the biblical land and we've have the right to it because of the Bible is a bunch of hogwash, and they really don't believe it anymore.
Yeah, they're going secular,
And that as not only are they going secular, but as the information highway, as they're able to get access to the images and to other genres and to other viewpoints. I mean, this year, I have to tell you, in the Jewish progressive community, there were dozens of liberation seders and Jewish anti-Zionist forces came out in support of the Palestinian people. I mean, it's presented a real moral dilemma.
There's a lot of Jewish people coming out in support of the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
Oh, wait, a lot? Are you talking a trickle, or are you talking a lot? Is there a lot of sentiment going that way?
To me, I see more.
You're talking the old line Trotsky guys and Marxists and stuff?
I'm talking about the youth as they're coming up, as the college-educated youth of today that are
apparently, I hear that on the campuses. There's a lot of anti-Zionist sentiment, even among Jewish people on the campuses.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a strong Zionist sentiment as well, but it's being outmoded by logic, by sense, by the fact that, you know, look, you know, Israel as a secular state can't claim anymore this kind of, you know, this kind of justification for all of its aggressive moves over and over again on the fact of paranoia.
No, but they might.
On the fact of, you know, and it's just not washing anymore.
No, but they would claim, as the United States would claim, that they could, away from that, they could claim that we represent, like Auguste Comte or something, that there's progress in the human, and we represent progress. And they represent progress. They got the Hebrew University, they got education, they're learning, they're doing great progress. So that they represent progress. And that's always the attitude of the colonial attitude toward the other peoples. I read Cecil Rhodes every year, and the attitude of them, or the American Indian peoples, or other peoples, or what happened in Latin America, the attitude of that we're bringing progress.
Well, we hope so.
They will make that argument. And the Israelis, I must probably feel that they are doing that, and that the surrounding people are just like backward tribal people that they have to be, it's a white man's burden. The idea of the white man's burden is held in the consciousness of the Israelis toward these wogs. They were called wogs by the British and so forth, derisively.
Sure, I mean, I think there's an element of racism, and there's an element of white supremacy
and the Israelis
or European supremacy.
Yeah, European, and the Israeli, I mean the Arab and the Muslim world see the Israelis as European colonizers.
I think it's even a little bit. Well, I think at one point they did, of course, but I think that it's above and beyond. It's now starting to be on its way. They know that it's the last colonial occupation in the world.
It's the only one that held.
It's the only one that's
Where else do we have that? Where else do we have that?
We have genocide and war crimes being committed in places like Darfur.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, definitely we do. But I mean, this colonial occupation, I think Lenny did make a good point that.
We had like
apartheid was the last real racist colonial system.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Maybe so. That's right. That's right. And he made a good point about that. That was good. Yeah. But you had like it was horrible. The French had been in. Well, they were in Indochina. Yeah, we went and picked up after Dien Bien Phu, and you had a thing over in Vietnam, and we went over there, and we called them gooks, and we killed 4 million of them. The United States did. And then the French were in the. What's the difference between? Or let's say more apropos would be the French in Algeria. They were there for 500 years, and they had a terrible hard fight to have the French come back from there. What's the difference between Israel and the French in Algeria, from the standpoint of the people who were there?
Very interesting question.
Or even could it be drawn to Vietnam? Because we were going to fight in order to... No. Okay, you see not.
I'll tell you why not. Because the French occupation and even the American occupation of Vietnam always knew that it was a temporary occupation and that they had no legal or moral right to be there, and that this colonization would eventually end. It just, you know, it had to get to the point where the French were taking too much punishment, and where obviously a ground war, an air war, but never did the French feel that they had a moral right to be in Algeria or to incorporate it as its own territory.
Well, we were then in Algeria, but if you remember well, in Vietnam, we were then there, Mr. Johnson and so forth, and we put all those forth, because we were then fighting a greater force against civilization that we were bringing. It was called communism.
But we knew
now it's terrorism, Islamic or is terrorism.
No, but we have to make the distinction there, and I think you've made that distinction in the past, that, you know, Israel feels, or the Israeli people, or the Israeli government, or the Zionists, or whatever, feel that they have a moral right to be in this land, that they have some historical right to be in this land until kingdom come.
Yeah,
where the French didn't feel that in Algeria, and where the United States...
Well, they'd been there 500 years.
But they still didn't claim any territorial, in other words, this land was given to us by God from biblical times.
Well, that's a different narrative.
That's what I'm saying.
But it's a narrative, and the narrative's going to have great force.
But the French knew that that was a temporary occupation. They knew they couldn't hang on to Algeria, to North Africa forever. They knew colonialism was on its way out, and that they had to set up something that, you know, would be viable for French, colonial interests or supranational interests in some way, and get out. Okay, and the United States and Vietnam also knew that they could not sustain, even if their pretext was fighting communism, that fight wasn't going to last forever, and that eventually they'd have to get out, and what they wanted to do...
Well, they thought they were going to win.
And they hoped to set up a proxy.
They were going to set up a proxy, and they were going to set it up, and they were going to win, and the values of civilization were going to be advanced and so forth.
Right.
And
but they weren't going to stay there forever.
They killed 4 million people.
Right. And they morally justified it, as they always did.
They tried.
As the criminals always do.
And then they finally said it was a mistake. Now, there are people who are saying maybe Zionism and the establishment of Israel was historically a mistake.
It definitely was. I mean,
you think? No, wait a minute. It was a mistake from the beginning.
I believe
so Mr. McNamara finally said, we made a mistake in Vietnam. Do you know, you see him saying with fogs of war?
Yeah,
we made a mistake. The French finally, some French, some of them still think it wasn't. Or the Italians killed half of the population of Libya.
But I
when
think
they're colonial
Israel's-
power.
It's still a very different question, and it's a very different
What
question.
makes it
because,
different? What
well,
makes it different?
Number
And,
one,
if I may,
historical.
one thing, if I may. The people in the Islamic world see Israel as European colonizers.
Absolutely.
They do.
However,
Now, wait a minute. Say that again. Say that again. They see them as European colonizers.
Yes.
Why does that not hold as correct in terms of the movement of history? What's the difference between the European-based Ashkenazi Jewish people there, establishing that based upon a narrative that went back in history, and the French in Algeria or other places where European colonization was there, and the march of history is against colonization?
Oh, yes.
And if you think Israel was a mistake, in a certain sense, that would be saying it is not going to hold.
In many ways, it was a mistake to be set up the way it was set up, and it's not going to hold because you're right.
You don't think it is going to hold?
No, I don't think it's going to hold.
You
In the way it is now, it's not going to hold. As a purely Jewish state, it will not. It'll never sustain itself that way.
Well, that's a pretty important dialectic in the world geopolitical map.
Either it's going to turn into something more democratic, more secular, because it's the only way it could survive is if it becomes
secular.
Well, but secular and democratic in the way that it's going to be either more metamorphose into a state for all the people that live there, okay, including the modern day Israelis, or it's going to be destroyed as a Jewish state because it's going to have met the ire of its enemies so harshly that it's going to be wiped off the map. And we do not want that to happen.
No, you don't
that
want
is
that.
in the, however, that is, you know, in the sort of prophetic vision of the culmination of this. Even these Armageddonists today believe that Israel had to go through this stage. It had to come to be, and then it has to come to fruition, and then it has to eventually be wiped off the face of the map.
Well, I'm not sure exactly that's the way I read John Revelations. I mean, I don't see it exactly.
It says Israel will ultimately.
No, but they will. The Jewish will all come. They will come to accept Jesus.
Yeah, they'll come.
Those that don't will be wiped out.
As a state, it will be destroyed, though.
That's why they're supporting Israel, because they can read it into this. That religious kind of stuff really gets us into hot water.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But before we go there, what I want to do is clarify your past question,
Okay.
your last question, which was the fact that it is still different, though, than the French adventures in Algeria
What makes it different?
and the Vietnam.
Okay,
because
what makes
of the
it different?
fact that even Muslims recognize that this is the holy land of the seat of the three religions, the three people, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, all kind of, you know, have a right to be there. But how they have a right to be there is different. So in other words, it's not really called into question that Jewish people have a right to be in Palestine or Israel or whatever it's going to be called. Okay, but the way they have the right to be there, they have a right to be there in a more pluralistic fashion, not as a dominating force. And that, in other words, most Muslims and Arabs in any solution, they include the Jews in the solution. Like, in other words, they basically say, well, you know, in other words, you know, since they've been here and they're here since 1948, we cannot wipe them into the sea. There's something called rights by residence that's recognized, that any state that will come out of this does not want to necessarily push the Jews into the sea. Okay?
Do you think people would have that in their sentiment if they could, after having everything destroyed? They've just come in and wiped it, you know, like Sherman coming through, wiped everything out. The people in Lebanon right now might very well be saying, I would love to see them pushed into the sea.
Many
in their heart of hearts.
In their heart of hearts.
The bulk of the population.
Well, no, I wouldn't even say the bulk of the population recognizes that the Jewish people are there to stay and that they want to incorporate them into some sort of a binational. Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Ahmadinejad in Iran doesn't seem to think that, or at least maybe he's just talking to the street of Iran. And you've got Persia now rearing itself behind that. They've destroyed Iraq. That was a threat.
I mean, in other words, it's a nice feeling for, say, Palestinian refugees who have been languishing in the camps for 59 years now to think about, you know, oh, well, it would be nice if Israel was wiped off the face of the map and we can go back to historic Palestine, have our lands and our homes and our villages. And but that's not the vision,
also,
even of Ahmadinejad.
Just a human thing like vengeance.
Well, not even vengeance so much, but to say, like, well, it would be nice if we could clear them out and, you know, in other words, go back to where our historical land was without having to worry about them.
Right.
But that's not the rhetoric that you hear.
I suppose. I bet you there's some people, you don't hear that rhetoric. No. Okay, I was just saying, is it in their heart? Because that's what people think is in the hearts of the people of the, and Mr. Ahmadinejad in Iran is saying Israel shouldn't exist.
Well, but let's
And he
clarify
said,
again.
we never did anything against the Jews.
That's
Why
correct.
don't they go back to Europe where they were persecuted?
Well,
Why don't you give them Bavaria?
Yeah.
Okay, that might have a certain kind of logic to it.
Well,
or
it
something,
actually does.
in a certain
Because
sense.
if the Germans were the ones that displaced the Jews
Yeah.
and caused the Holocaust, why didn't Germany give them a state? I can understand
Or
what he's
why
saying.
don't they find
But-
a state in Germany or someplace in Europe? That's what he says.
But you know what?
And it has a resonance among a lot of people.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, even Norman Finkelstein
And you
says
said,
it,
you said
know?
to me, if I may, you said you thought Zionism was a historical mistake.
I think it was, but
If
however...
they had not done that, if they had not gone that way, they would, the Jewish people in this world would be, it doesn't seem to me like the anti-Semitism thing of that appeared in Nazi Germany, it appeared, they would have been much better off, don't you think?
Well, I think that...
If they hadn't, they'd be doctors and lawyers and living and doing very well and so forth.
I mean, I
without
think
all
so.
the trouble. They set up the state and it's nothing but sores ever since.
And I also don't think that Jews couldn't have not gone to Palestine. I mean, they could have gone
they
to
could have gone.
Palestine, and they could have lived and settled in Palestine with their Palestinian counterparts. See, the dehumanization of the Palestinians to the point where they won't even call them Palestinians.
No, no.
Where they'll conflate them
Yes,
with they'll say
dehumanize.
the dehumanization.
That's what colonists do. And
Correct,
it's strange.
correct,
They were
correct.
put in that position in Germany. Now they get to do it to them.
And the blaming of
They-
the victim. I mean, every
Yeah,
time
yeah.
when you negate all, I mean, the Palestinians have wanted to negotiate for years. In fact, and you know, I'm not saying that Lenny was wrong, but there are every single faction of the PLO has written up a document on what they would see as a comprehensive solution to the Palestinian problem.
Yeah,
For
he says
example, the Democratic Front adheres to a two-state solution, where they would all parties in the area would recognize all peoples in the area. They would recognize an Israeli state within defined boundaries, 1967 boundaries, alongside a contiguous Palestinian state, and that would be viable. And they have a constitution, and they have a Declaration of Independence and everything. Yes, it's in Arabic. I'm sure we could get it in English. The Popular Front has envisioned a one-state solution, binational state for all, a democratic, secular state for all the peoples in the area. Even those who adhere to an Islamic state include the Jews in that vision. Okay? So
Yeah, but
that
the Jews don't want to be included in that vision.
they may not want to be included in that vision,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So in other words,
They want to be in charge.
I mean, it's not.
I mean, it's power. And Lord Acton said, power tends
Sure.
to corrupt, absolute power corrupt. They have absolute power, do they not, militarily?
Yes, they do.
In a
yes,
certain
they
sense.
do.
Are
But
they-
they're not invincible, as is being
Well,
proved right now in
That's
Lebanon.
what I was trying to get
They're not
across to
invisible.
Lenny. When they went in to see Mr. Yarfat with their thousands of tanks, I think they have absolute, and it's all from us, or they build their own, but it's our support and everything. And then,
No, it's
but there
mostly
was
US
no
things.
way anyone could have bombed Haifa from Ramallah
No.
when they had that thing
No.
with Mr. Yarfat. But there seems to be, and they had this aura of invincibility. They got atomic bombs.
They
They've
certainly
got
do.
Apache helicopters. They got complete, like the United States has,
Exactly.
in a certain sense, on the world.
Sure.
Okay, and they have a vision of there being the force of progressiveness and so forth, and so forth. But now
Well-
you've got this thing in Lebanon where
Yeah.
there's some reaction coming,
I
and they've
think
actually
that's-
lobbed a couple of rockets into Haifa, and now they're really upset. It's like a movie where the Nazi officer would say, "You shot our guard. We're now going to mow down the whole village.
exactly.
We got to mow
Exactly.
down the whole village of you
Exactly.
people." In the Balkans,
Yeah.
they did that sort of
Of
thing
course.
because they had a sense of how important they were compared to these nothing
Exactly.
people that they were
Yeah.
dehumanizing.
I mean, John Bolton's
Does it
statement.
hold, do you think?
Well, yes, it does. It proves that Israel is not invincible because
Yeah,
it's
that's
not
what I'm
only-
saying.
It proves
That's
that.
right.
It proves that
That's
because,
right.
Because and it proves that the United States is also not
Militarily
invincible.
even.
Well, number one, there's nothing. We have to employ
Yeah.
David and Goliath here.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think it's the best metaphor for any of these situations where no matter what, you're never going to 100% with all your tanks, with all your weapons, with all your nuclear weapons and all your power, you're never going to squash the will of the people to be free. First of all, the Israelis, with all of their power, the Intifada proved it, that with all of their military might, they would never squash the will of the Palestinian with a rock in his hand, refusing to
Yeah,
live
right.
under
Against
the
the
Israeli,
tank.
against the tank,
Yeah.
against nuclear weapons,
Yeah,
against
right.
missiles.
Yeah, right.
Will never squash the will
That's
of
what
that
Hezbollah
Palestinian
has
child.
their fist in the air with a
Correct.
Kalashnikov, right?
Correct.
So that's resistance, and the slaves are not supposed to resist.
And we have
No.
another thing that really, and it's not because of 72 virgins, it's because of knowing the purity of their cause. Hezbollah and the Palestinian child is not afraid to die, to defend their cause, to defend what they believe is their freedom, is their freedom and their land, right? You can never squash the will. So those Davids will never, ever be completely, Israel will never be 100% invincible, okay? There's always a guerrilla movement. There's always a ground war, which right now it's being proven in the south of Lebanon. Israel will never win the ground war. What they will do is they'll now bombard from air, land, sea. They might hit Beirut tomorrow.
They kill a lot of civilians.
They'll kill a lot of innocent people.
Kill.
But does this make Israel any safer?
No, it's going to come back politically, and in the world is going to come back negatively against them. I believe, don't you?
I do. It also proves one point that the Palestinians have been saying for the longest time, and now Hezbollah, there is no military solution to this conflict. It has to be through negotiations. It has to be from a comprehensive solution to the Palestinian problem, which is at the core of all the problems of Israel and the Middle East and the region. And until a fair, equitable, and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian problem and all lands occupied, whether in Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, anywhere since 1967, are given back.
Okay.
And that's never going to be.
That's the Middle East thing, which is probably the most dangerous part of the world, because you have these deep felt emotions and so forth around narratives that are built and so forth. But then that is tied into a larger context. It seems to me that Israeli thing is tied into a larger context, which involves the United States of America.
Of course, there has to be
as
a
superpower.
Solution.
Claiming legitimacy, and the point being, if I could, in a historical sense, that this I was trying to get across with Lenny, he couldn't get to it, or we couldn't get to it, that we have an evolution of society. We have a planet. We got 6 billion people here. We have weapons systems that exist now, hair trigger alert, that if they are unleashed will mean the end, apparently. This should be curriculum, that we should know what the facts are, would mean the end of the whole species. We got that situation. Since about 1970. And we got these things. And then we have, we also have on the other side an incredible capability, technologically augmented capability of providing for all 6 billion, maybe 10 billion people that we have on this planet that are coming. And we have a system that is in place that Jimmy Carter said on the television the other day. Do we have a system that has justice, or a trend toward justice for the masses of the people of the world? No. Of course not. No. We have a system that serves the few. It's a capitalist system that's in place in every country. China's going they got gated communities, the whole thing. There's not a system in place that the earth requires if we're going to have the elemental justice and efficiency of a system where the capability of the whole human society is able to be brought forth. The system that they're claiming legitimacy for is not adequate to what the future requires. There have been a lot of people who have had Soviet Union model fell apart, that kind of thing. There are no models anywhere. There's no thing. But the thing is that they will challenge that, and that then the groundwork might be laid for us to set up an operating manual for Spaceship Earth that's going to serve the interests of everybody, and it's not going to be served under the Israeli or the American, more important model. We need a new one. I happen to think maybe Libya has some context that might be able to be a model, as America was to European feudal states. They've got some ideas about economics and that sort of thing, but we don't have. Do you understand? There may be a time when the intellectual challenge to come up with a way of how we're going to operate this system for everybody rather than for a few is going to dawn. And that's what the real challenge is that might come out of this Middle Eastern mess.
And in order to do that, we have to recognize that, like you said, even on a micro level, even just dealing with the Middle East, even just dealing with Israel and Palestine, that there has to be, first of all, it cannot be a military solution. It has to be a political, negotiated solution that employs justice, compassion, fairness, humanity. And that's something that, you know, any of these military solutions are never going to do it. And it has to be true fairness. So in order to achieve the world that you're envisioning, of course, maybe the world global capitalist system has to come to an end because it's not just and fair. It does only cater to the few. As long as we have this power relation where, you know, even in the thing what I'm saying,
okay, go ahead.
We have the politicians that are sitting at the top, and they're, you know, they have
corrupt.
They have everything.
Gabe Palace says it's the best democracy money can buy. They're stuffing money into their pockets, and they're not serving the. And no, the thing of it is, if I may, it's not really. Its history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. It is. You wouldn't expect it coming from the politicians or from the business people.
No.
But the intellectuals,
and not
the
only,
intellectuals,
and the grassroots.
Well, the grassroots, yes, okay, but in the intellectual, where's Voltaire? Where are the large ideas that take the measure of things in a large way? Marx, is it going to be a Marxist social? A lot of people on the left think it's going to be socialism we're going to have that's going to do it. And that kind of, it might be. I'm open to that, but it might be. But we got a thing where we're going to have to start, and it's not just, if I may, it's not just justice. Justice is there, but it is so, when we have a capability of providing for everyone, we've hard won capability of technologically augmented. We have an internet now. We have this we have a capability that is so of providing for everyone, and we don't have a system that lets us do for everyone what we're collectively able to do. It's built-in schizophrenia, and it's so inefficient. I mean, rather than just justice, I mean, that's an argument that they've been talking about since Cro-Magnon caves, and all our spiritual leaders and the political leaders ignore. But that it's inefficient to have a system where so much of the human capability is not being able to be utilized because they're mired in poverty.
Of course, of course.
Okay.
And mired
now
in
the
politics.
socialist thing might be there, but they should be asking those questions. It might make a context where really asking the situation and coming up with an alternative might come out, because that's the opposite side of us. We're hurtling toward destroying ourselves over outdated systems and outdated thinking, including a lot of what the progressives call the progressive agenda.
Sure.
Do you understand? I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
It may be that we're coming at a time of real crisis in terms of it, and it's the intellectuals that are falling down on the job, not the politicians.
Well, it could. Well, that's a point. That's a point.
Well,
and
anyway,
so how do we revive the intellectual aspect, especially when?
Well, think comprehensively.
Yeah.
Hey, historically, think comprehensively. What's going on? You know, where are the real big? Who are the people that really have that offer a vision? There's no vision among our political leadership. It's not the Democratic Party.
Well, they'll
it's not that,
as long as these voices are obscured as well. I mean, they're denigrated, they're obscured, they're kept out of the mainstream. As long as the mainstream has its genre that, creates its own realities and whatnot, because obviously it knows this and it wants to obscure the truth. It knows that if most people saw the truth, that the few and the politicians were running everything and they were quieting the voices of the intellectuals, or they were marginalizing them. I mean, look, it's not even trendy to be an intellectual anymore, right? Well, if you think about it, I mean, let's not go by the mainstream, but let's look at the political system.
Well, the intellectuals are all sold out for a pottage of corn, or a little pottage of. They've all got contracts and stuff, and the template's all set by the guys that own the assets, and everybody else is working on their plantation.
Well, I mean, and not only
the professors get grants and things like that, and they get bought off.
But even above and beyond that,
or specialized out to where they can't think about the whole and become a threat to the pirates that are thinking about the whole.
But I was thinking more along the lines that, and that is a good point, but more along the lines that within the political community that runs things in the United States, it's not even trendy.
Political and business.
Yeah, they don't hire intellectuals.
Well, they're never intellectual. Oh, I see what you mean.
Right? In other words, they don't want to hear from intellectuals.
Well, even the university,
but even say something that makes sense.
Yeah, but even the universities now are being subverted by the money and that kind of thing. They're all being subverted by the people that own. Paul Krugman had a thing in the paper where in the United States, the growth over the last few years, it didn't go even to the upper 5%, not the 1%. The real growth went to 1/100th of 1%.
Yeah.
I mean, we do not have anything like a democracy, and people don't have enough to eat.
Of course.
On the world scale. So there's something wrong, and there isn't. I don't know where it's going to come from. Maybe in public access television, we could have forums where we would actually talk about things beyond the left, right?
Sure.
It might not be socialism. It might be socialism. But some sort of change has to come, fundamental paradigm shift, change, awakening or something, and it's not in the offing by anything that we see from any of our leadership.
No, I know all our leadership. Absolutely. I don't have any faith in the leadership, but I think what I do have faith in, though, is the power of the people. And I mean, whether that goes from the power of that little Palestinian throwing a rock, or if it goes from the power of progressive media, as you and I are trying to achieve, to tell the truth and to get away from the class-ridden, basically state-controlled media that's only representing the viewpoint of the ruling class.
It is in every country of the world.
I think truth really has something. Truth still has its place in history.
Well, that might be the inevitability, the legitimacy, the historical legitimacy. Like
exposing the truth, exposing the lie.
Like this representative democracy we came up with in Thomas Jefferson's time and so forth was heralding an industrial revolution that it was not going to be denied by the world because it was in the zeitgeist. Well, there's something now that's transcending where we've been for 225 years, 29 years, is blowing, that is there, and it calls for something new. And rather than just keep driving into the future on the rear view mirror, using all the old institutions and assumptions, because you don't have, we ought to start having some venues where vision can be actually discussed outside of the normal ways in which everything is cut up and discussed.
And I mean, we also have to realize that every one of us are subject to a certain extent to mind control.
Oh, yes, I think,
and I mean, look at it this way. As long as the little guy on the street is as much as he knows that the mainstream media is lying, but as long as there's some portion of that that's internalized, that the United States and Israel's the good guys, and Hezbollah are the evil terrorists, and you know, oh well, the United States government couldn't possibly be complicit in events like 9/11 or even Waco.
Yeah, 9/11's getting legs. You know, 9/11's getting legs.
But the average little guy still says no because I still believe in the legitimacy of my government. These officials can't be lying to me because America is still a great place and we have to be on the right side.
Well,
As long
I'd
as
like to think that. I like America.
Everyone would like to think that. But to realize
maybe we're the ones who beat the rap. We do have the order. We have the system for the ages.
But as long as we know,
no other empire has.
Right,
They've
but
all fallen.
But we know that we're not always, that the United States government is not necessarily on the right side all the time.
I think they could be the major problem in the world because they're all caught up within institutions which are outdated. We're going to have massive displacement of labor in the productive process. All income is distributed by this labor cockamamie labor theory of value. They're all wage slaves on the plantation of the people who own the assets, a tiny pewter-cladded class. And why that's accepted by the intellectual community, I do not know. There's got to be some other system. And this may herald to where they'll bring that up. I mean, it'll come out of the Middle East.
Even the intellectuals don't have not necessarily given up on, you know, the legitimacy of the United States. I mean, even the intellectuals, oh well, you know, you know, Israel might be legitimate after all, and Hezbollah might be terrorists, and you know, even the intellectuals are hanging on to these traditional.
Well, they've all got a stake.
Or does the government...
They've got a stake.
Could the government really be complicit in 9/11? I mean, even good people are hanging... You know, oh, no, U.S. government couldn't be complicit.
Patriotism is a very strong thing. It is. It's the last refuge of the scoundrel, as Mr. Mencken said. But it's still there. And also, there's a great deal good to be said for America. A great deal. I love the country. I love New York and all there and everything. But it's also the biggest problem because they don't have a vision. They don't have a vision adequate to what is required. I think maybe Libya might. I'm going to play a program after your program with Libya. I think they've got a model that as the United States was to Europe, he may be to the modern world with the idea, because of all things he questions the idea that we're going to distribute all income by wages. So everybody's a wage slave to the few people who own the asset. That's something that doesn't make any sense. They got to democratize ownership of that. And also the technology is going to be displacing people in the productive process. So we're coming to a renaissance or a liberation and everything from that institutions we've had, but we never bring up any discussion of an alternative on a planetary scale. This thing in the Middle East might usher in the context where something really creative will come that is required if we're going to survive as a species, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, we might be at the historical moment.
It seems that way to me, when you can blow up the whole world on one hand and you can take care of everything within an ecologically good context with good design and capability.